Brittany Watts, a 33-year-old black woman, says she went to the hospital multiple times after bleeding during her pregnancy. Watts returned home where she suffered a miscarriage. Now she's being charged with abuse of a corpse, and she faces up to 1 year in prison and a $2,500 fine.
Now, we've been keeping you updated on the story for the past few weeks, and luckily, the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office said grand jurors declined to return an indictment for abuse of a corpse against Brittany Watts. So she will not be prosecuted any further for having a miscarriage and having to experience not just the trauma of having a miscarriage, but also the trauma of being harassed by what is, I can only describe, an injustice system. So a little bit more on that. A municipal judge had found probable cause to bind over Watts's case after city prosecutors said she miscarried, clogging the toilet and removing some of its contents to an outdoor trash area, then left the house, leaving the 22-week-old fetus lodged in the pipe. So now a quick reminder of the events that preceded this. Watts had visited Mercy Health St. Joseph's Hospital twice in the days leading up to her miscarriage. Her doctor had told her she was carrying a non-viable fetus and to have her labor induced or risk significant risk of death, according to records of her case. Due to delays and other complications, her attorney said she left each time without being treated. After she miscarried, she tried to go to a hair appointment, but friends sent her to the hospital. A nurse called 911 to report a previously pregnant patient had returned reporting the babies in her backyard in a bucket. Hence why the police investigation was launched. Personally, I think the real investigation should be against the nurse who provided that information to the police and whether or not that was an appropriate phone call to make and whether or not it was appropriate information to divulge to the police and whether or not it violated privacy rights of Brittany Watts. But that aside, Ohio's abuse of corpse charge hinges on whether someone has treated a corpse in a way that would, quote, outrage reasonable community sensibilities, whatever the hell that means. However, an autopsy determined the fetus died in utero and identified no recent injuries. So as I already mentioned, the doctors at the hospital told her the fetus was non-viable. At the time of the miscarriage, the fetus was non-viable. It was not in pain, it didn't experience that. It was not alive, it was not a viable fetus. And Watts's lawyer, Tracy Timko, told the judge yesterday, Watts, who is black, had no criminal record and was being demonized for something that goes on every day. She also argued that Ohio's abuse of a corpse statute lacked clear definitions, including what is meant by human corpse and what constitutes outrage to reasonable family and community sensibilities. When the judge bound the case over, and as someone who has a law degree, has a lot of experience with judges, I always have to tell people that judges are not as smart as you think they are. And here's a perfect way to exemplify that. He said, there are better scholars than I am to determine the exact legal status of this fetus, corpse, body, birthing tissue, whatever it is. Whatever it is, that is what the judge, those were his official statements on this case. And you know what? I guess 3 years of law school, however many years as an attorney, and then however many more years as a judge don't qualify him to interpret this law. But fortunately, the laymen of the jury were sensible and smart enough to come to the correct decision that this judge and all of his extensive legal experience and education did not help him conclude. Now, in a statement following the ruling, Watts's lawyer said this: no matter how shocking or disturbing it may sound when presented in a public forum, it is simply the devastating reality of miscarriage. The last 3 months have been agonizing. We are incredibly grateful and relieved that justice was handed down by the grand jury today. So, Waz, I'll start with you. This story has been exceptionally frustrating because it comes, in the wake of Republicans promising for decades now that women would never be prosecuted for having a miscarriage. But at every level, the police officers, the prosecutors, and the judge in this case seemed hell-bent on making sure that this woman was punished for having a miscarriage.
Yeah, it seems to me just a lack of empathy and just decency across the board by the authorities here. The tragedy of this woman losing her child, I mean, I think that should be enough. That should be punishment enough. This idea that she desecrated some fetus or corpse or whatever is laughable. Like, who is this crime actually against? I guess I could understand if there was some public component to this, like she displayed something that the general public had to endure as well, that could be uncomfortable. I don't know. I just don't see how this could be construed as a crime against any citizen in Ohio. So just the idea that a woman loses her baby and the next thing she's going through is a criminal case is criminal in and of itself. These people need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and think about what's important to them, because this is a travesty.
I'll agree 100% with Waz, and I'll also say that this is another direct result of what happens because of the Dobbs decision getting rid of Roe versus Wade. And that under Roe versus Wade, even with some of the court cases that chipped away at it, you could still get an abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy, no questions asked. And in a case like this, in the second trimester, where a doctor says you have a non-viable a fetus, a pregnancy, you could get an abortion under those circumstances. But Dobbs got rid of that. And as a result, states like Ohio and countless other states have said, no, you can no longer get an abortion, particularly in the second trimester. And so women like this one, who's in the second trimester, who's told by her doctor, okay, you're gonna have to have a miscarriage because we can't perform abortions under Ohio law because of what's been happening in the Supreme Court. So now they have to wait it out, and they have to wait out for a miscarriage, which could have killed her, by the way. She has the miscarriage. And anybody, any family, any couple that has ever dealt with a miscarriage, with a pregnancy that has not gone to term, knows how devastating that is. It's terrible. It's horrible. It haunts the mother, particularly for months, sometimes years. And to add to that burden that now police are getting involved and saying, oh, you didn't dispose of the fetal tissue properly, therefore we're gonna bring you to a grand jury. That is insanity. Thank God the citizens in that part of Ohio, the grand jury had enough sense to realize this woman has suffered enough. This case should have never been prosecuted, but it's a lesson, again, about this is what happens when the Supreme Court decides to take away women's reproductive rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And all this case has made me think is, who do they think they're helping by prosecuting this woman? How is society any better by removing her from it? Because she could have been sentenced to prison for over a year, or up to a year, excuse me, if they had continued on, if there wasn't this sensible grand jury who intervened and stopped this horrific prosecution. No one would be helped, and only people who miscarry would be harmed, because it would have a chilling effect on individuals who miscarry being afraid to go to the hospital, because now they're gonna be afraid that they're gonna be, potentially sentenced to prison or prosecuted or fined or what have you. But also it creates a ridiculous precedent that, women across the country have miscarriages every day in any given place, at work, at the gym, wherever they may be, and oftentimes in the bathroom. So if you're in Ohio and you happen to miscarry at work while you're in the bathroom, then would you be forced to scoop whatever fetal remains there are out of the toilet at that place and dispose of them properly, whatever that means, because they didn't define that whatsoever? Just truly horrific.
Well, I also wonder if there's an element of racism here, because if this had been a young white woman who had a miscarriage and didn't dispose of something properly, would they have brought charges against her? Or would they have said, oh, no, we'll just, but here it's an opportunity to sort of stereotype, to say, oh, this is a woman who's black and she doesn't care about other living beings, and what a monster, and so we have to prosecute her. And that's, to me, look, I don't even have to guess. I think there probably was racism here, and that they would not have brought these charges if it had been a white woman who had disposed of the tissue in a way that a neighbor didn't like, because the police would say, but this was an opportunity for them to stick it to an African American. And I think that's what was going on here.
Yeah,
and obviously there's, this is the United States of America. There's always a racial component, but you have to wonder about the class background of the victim too. And I'm counting this young woman as a victim of the authorities here, in the sense that if this is a, like, hyper well-to-do person, you wonder if her hospital treats her much differently, and better, quite frankly. And unfortunately, that's the sad reality of our country. The more means that you have, the better care, the better service, the better treatment you get pretty much at every single part of your life. And so, you got to take all of those factors into account.
Yeah. And the way that she was demonized and the narrative was written by the police who investigated it, they framed it as though she gave birth to a live baby and then stuffed it down the toilet to kill it. That is exactly how they described it. And that is how it was reiterated by prosecutors. And that's how it was presented to the judge. And it was totally despicable. I'm glad that the charges have been dropped and she's not going to be indicted. But you're right, is a victim and deserves some serious compensation for the trauma that she's had to endure on top of the trauma she already endured from the miscarriage.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.